Our last speaker today is Algis Augustine. He is a graduate of the University of Notre Dame, graduated in 1966 from the Law School of University of Illinois, correct? Yes, okay. You graduated in 1969 though, right? Okay, good. He basically has been associated with private practice law ever since, and basically is the general practice law firm. Yes?
It was, but specialized in licensing law.
Okay, all right. So it's more of the stuff that we need to know as dentists and doctors and whatnot, what have you. So he's also served as the chief attorney, or as chief attorney by the Department of Professional Regulation, which is formerly, I guess, the Department of Registration and Education for the state of Illinois, in its regulatory branch, and is currently a consultant to healthcare professionals, all right? He has co-authored and been the editor of many publications in the field of law. So we're going to hear a little bit about dental law today. So, all right, please welcome Dr. Augustine.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I was just thinking before I got up here that when Rich was looking for a speaker to speak on this topic, he decided he would find the smartest speaker in the country on this topic, and he got turned down. And then he thought about it and said, I'm going to get the best looking speaker in the country on this topic. And he got turned down again. And then he said, I know what, I'm going to look for the most humorous speaker in the country. And I thought after I turned him down twice already, I couldn't turn him down a third time. So I'm delighted to be here. As he was saying, my name is Augustine, and the variations of that, it never matters to me. I've been, the only part of my professional background that's really important is because I was the chief prosecutor for the Illinois Licensing Agency for 5 years. And in that time prosecuted doctors, dentists, other professionals around the country in Illinois. And then I led 5 national conferences of regulators, investigators, and attorneys general from around the country trying to learn from each other. So I have a background from the prosecutor standpoint. And then since 1979, when I left the agency and started my own law firm, and I created a multi-state law firm representing professionals all across the country, and primarily in licensing, sometimes with malpractice, sometimes with some corporate business, sometimes different other things, but mainly in the area of how to deal with licensing problems when somebody was charged with a crime or charged with a violation of the license law. And what I found after a while, that I got more interest myself in helping people not get there, preventing getting there, and working so that they can avoid having to go to a hearing, avoid having a big problem with the license law people. And that's where I spent my last 20 years really focusing on. So I've never spoken to this group before, but I've been very impressed with the meeting the last couple of days, at the quality of the speakers, the quality of the people attending, and I've been to many of these kind of meetings before, so I'm very impressed. So I wanted to make sure you understand. I'm going to talk to you about some things. I'm not here to try to scare you or give angst or anything like that. But what I'm here to do is to try to give you some comfort and hope that you can leave the meeting, practice dentistry the way you want, the way your patients want, and without fear of any problems with your license or malpractice and things like that. And the best example I can give of that, I've been working with some integrative and alternative medical doctors for over 25 years. And during that time, not one doctor has lost their license. Not one doctor has been found liable on a medical malpractice case, to my judgment. And what they've done is, in part, listen to some of the things I've been telling them, and then based on their good common sense and judgment, we've gotten through this whole thing together. So I put my name and my phone number and email there, only because if you want to talk to me after the meeting, feel free to call, no charge, nothing like that. Just, I'm happy to talk to people. I've practiced law for many years. I do consulting now, but very specialized. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have along the way. So today we're going to talk about how to protect your practice, the patient relationship, which I think is just so important. Some of it may seem a little bit obvious to you, but I can assure you that every single thing I talk about in that has come up in some type of licensing defense case that I've handled. And I've handled the licensing defense of probably over 200 doctors where I had to go to a hearing, or at least I was threatened with going to a hearing, where they were threatened with a revocation of their license, or they were threatened with something more serious. We'll talk about how to deal with patient complaints and of course, how to deal with government requests if they happen. You hope they don't, but you know, you're in an area of dentistry that you're not traditional. You're not doing the things the way everybody does it in the dental world. You're doing things a little different. So you have a possibility of some point or other having an issue brought up, receiving a letter, getting an investigator at the door or something like that, and you ought to know how to handle it. And your staff ought to know how to handle it, and you ought to have policies in place at your office in case those kind of things happen. I've been telling people this for, 25, 30 years, and those that do it, they don't have any problem. Those that don't do it invariably have problems. And I want to give you an example of what can happen completely wrong and in that area. I had one doctor friend of mine in Tennessee who I've given the same lectures, the same talks for years, and he had an investigator show up in his office on a minor little complaint. It's so minor, I don't even remember what the issue was now, but it was very, very minor, and it would have just gone away immediately. But he said to the investigator, "Oh, you're here in my office. Why don't I show you my whole office? I'll show you how I keep records. I'll show you all my IV therapies that I'm giving." And he walks the investigator around. The investigator makes notes, and a month later, the doctor receives a complaint from the medical board charging him with X and Y and Z issues and threatening to revoke or suspend his license. And in fact, this doctor, 2 years later, did get revoked. I was not representing him because of various reasons, but he did lose his license because he invited the investigator in, walked around the office, and you don't do that. They're the other guys. They're the other side. You just don't do that. So make sure you don't. So what do we do to protect our office? We have to know what to protect it from to begin with, in my opinion. And so I've listed here the most common areas other than committing a felony, which is one of the most common areas, but I haven't listed that. So problems stem from your competitors, from people who watch how you're marketing, your websites, your social media, disgruntled employees, et cetera, et cetera. So let's try to go through some of those and talk about them. Okay, competitors. I would say that probably at least that's number 3 on the list of reasons that doctors or dentists have had problems because of their competitors. And the competitors find out about what they're doing, and then they report it to somebody, some agency, some person. How do you deal with competitors? Everybody deals with it differently. Some people ignore them, remain very quiet, and just hope that word of mouth will take care of things, and that's the way they want to carry on their practice. Others are very out there, and they go and meet the people and they talk to them. I can't tell you how to deal with it yourself, but understand that your competitors are not necessarily your friends. They're somebody who does things differently. They do things traditionally. You don't, or you don't all the time, and you have to be careful of them. So be careful. Some people, you want to be invisible sometime. That's up to you, okay? The important thing for you to know, and that's why it's so important that you have this kind of group, is that there is federal case law in this country that says if you're practicing medicine, dentistry, whatever a profession, And you were doing it along with a respectable minority. That's the magic words, the respectable minority. The majority may not punish you for that, okay? So that's different than saying, I'm the only one doing it, okay? That's when you have a group, a large group of people, that becomes a respectable minority. And then the traditional majority cannot punish you for that. And that's federal case law. And so you want to be aware of that kind of thing. So that's why meetings like this are very important, to get your continuing education, to attend the meetings, to talk to your fellow professionals. What are you doing? What are you doing right? What are you doing wrong? You learn, you try to grow. It's constantly evolving. I mean, all professions are part science and part art. You know, that there's science involved, and then there's all the other little things around it. So you want to learn and move forward and grow in that way. One of the areas that you have to be careful of is how you market your practice. I don't know whether if you do it through newspaper advertisements, through radio, through speeches, through whatever you may do it, but be aware that all of that can be reviewed by a governmental agency. So a lot of times, and I found this to be absolutely the fact, the professional will delegate the advertising and marketing to the office manager, and then the office manager will take care of what they need to do, but they don't know what the laws and rules and regulations are for professionals. And professional marketing and advertising is just plain different. For example, if you're selling a car, you can say, we have the best car in the world. As a professional, you can't say, I'm the best professional in the world. That's not appropriate. You can say in certain advertising of cars or other things, I guarantee this is the case. As a professional, you can't say, I guarantee you'll get better, or I guarantee this will work. You can't say that I have a cure for this, or that there's certain things you can and you can't say. So I suggest strongly that any marketing materials you have reviewed by somebody that you know that knows something about professional marketing in your state and what a professional can and cannot say. So I think that's very, very important. I'll give you an example of how this can go completely awry. Many years ago, I was hired to represent a number of dentists in the state of Florida who were getting complaints made to them at the dental board level for just constant complaints, one complaint after another, after another, after another. And there were about 30 of these dentists that I was representing. And my partner and I said, what in the world is going on here? I mean, this is just constant. It's like every week. And finally, we figured out that the Dental Society had put together a plan to get rid of all dentists in the area who were advertising. Because at that point, advertising was just brand new for the professionals. For those of you who don't know, professional advertising was illegal until the U.S. Supreme Court made it legal in the late 70s. And they said if you do truthful, honest advertising, why can't professionals advertise? Because before that time, they could hand out a card, they could give a speech, but they couldn't put an advertisement in a newspaper. Some of these dentists were putting advertisements in newspapers, and the traditional dentists who didn't advertise went after them. I ended up having to go to 33 hearings defending these dentists. To our credit, we won them all because the state was so disorganized in how they did it. But at one point in time, somebody went into one of the Dental Society meetings and took a tape and heard one of the president of the Florida Dental Board saying we're going to get all these advertising dentists and hang them from the tallest tree. And you can imagine that's like the smoking gun. And a lawsuit was soon to follow, and about 4 years later, they paid a huge judgment to the plaintiffs in this case. I was involved in the early stages of the case, but not in the latter. So you know, that can happen from competitors, but it can happen around advertising. So if you give a speech, be careful what you say. If you do advertising, be careful what you say. Please advertise if you want. I would never say don't do it. I would never say don't do your radio or whatever you do. Just know what you can and can't say, and then you'll move forward in a good fashion. I mentioned the last thing. I don't know how many of you know what Quackwatch is, but okay, you do. I've dealt with them many times. So know that they might be there watching you and looking at you, and then they see an advertisement they don't like, and they report it to the board. So be aware of that. I've been involved in multi-lawsuits against them, and all worked out fine. But just be aware that they exist, and obviously you are. So good for you folks. So one of the other areas that has happened a number of times, the problems become with employees who are disgruntled because they usually they were fired, but sometimes because they just whatever had to leave. So what do I recommend? I mean, obviously don't have disgruntled employees, but that's too easy. So you know, be careful in your hiring practices. Know that this person could cause you trouble later on, and I can tell you that they have many times, many times. I have a simple example of a doctor who fired an employee. 2 weeks later, that employee filed a complaint with the state saying the doctor's office was a pigsty and uninhabitable, and nobody should be in there. It was not the case, but of course an investigator comes out, starts an investigation, and then one thing leads to another, and it took 2 years to get the whole matter unraveled because the employee was unhappy. So what do I recommend when you fire somebody? I recommend that you sit down and talk to them. You get some sort of release signed by them. Oftentimes there's a payment from you for a week or two or a month or whatever it may be. Make sure that as part of that payment you have a release from that person, and make sure that release says that person acknowledges that nothing happened wrong while he was or she was at the office, and that he or she is leaving because, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So you have that, at least a statement in there that this person signed stating that nothing happened wrong. And we'll talk about patients later on, but it's just, the same thing is true with patients. So other people that can cause problems, you know, I've seen ex-girlfriends, ex-boyfriends cause problems, ex-spouses. You know, that's just part of life. You want to be careful and move forward and know that all those things are potential, and so you have to be sensitive to that. So you're wise to have a team of people around you that help guide you, and so that you can deal with issues like this. I even, when I was with a former group, and you might even think about this for your group, I put together what was called a risk management group, so that if any member of the group had a problem that they didn't know how to handle, they would call the executive director. The executive director would get two of the board members, and then one of the lawyers, which was myself at that point, and we would all get on the phone with that person and talk and try to work through what their risk level was on this kind of thing. So that kind of thing makes total sense to deal with it right at the beginning, you know, protect yourself rather than after the fact when you have to spend a lot of money on lawyers and potential witnesses and things like that. So be careful of all of that. And so we deal with patients. Obviously, patients are the most important thing in the practice, but patients can sometimes become unhappy. And that's what I was alluding to a few minutes earlier. Sometimes they just aren't happy with the result. Sometimes they had false expectations of the result. And even though the result was what you said it would be, they have an idea that it was going to be something different. And so you need to figure out how to deal with that unhappy patient. And I recommend you really figure out how to deal with it rather than let the patient go and file a complaint or a lawsuit or something like that, which ends up becoming much worse, maybe financially, but certainly emotionally, certainly on your time level and all of those kind of things. So you really, really don't want to go there if you can avoid it. And you know, with the patient, as I'll get into this slide later on, but since I'm talking about it now, I'll mention it, that oftentimes it might be better to refund the patient's money along with a release, and in the release, among other things, the patient says, I did not report this to any governmental entity. Because I've seen doctors pay patients whatever amount of money, a refund of their fees, and then 3 weeks later they get a letter from the government agency attacking them for this exact same issue. So if that was going to happen, why give the person the money back? You may as well save the money for whatever reason you need the money for. So that's a decision you have to make on a case-by-case basis. I don't say give the money back all the time, but sometimes it just makes more sense to do it and move on than to deal with problems. So, you know, obviously the doctor-patient relationship is the key to all of this, and you don't want patients unhappy if you can. And so how do you keep patients happy? You keep them happy by really working with them in a partnership. And how do you do that? I mean, everybody will have their own style on this, but I can tell you that it's so important to treat them like you would your mother, your father, your sister, your brother. I was on the board of a cancer company for 27 years, a cancer hospital for 27 years. And one of our brand mottos was called the mother standard of care. And that's what all of our employees would learn, that we will treat every patient who walks in this facility as we would as though she were our mother. And it worked very, very well. Where a typical hospital may have 3 or 5 lawsuits of some type of malpractice filed a year, we had 1 filed in 10 years. Because everybody was taught that that's the way we treat people. This is the way our focus is. And if there's a problem, we'll deal with it. But it was called the mother standard of care, and whether you call it the brother standard or the father, or but that's what they called it. So it worked very, very well in the hospital setting. In other words, treat everybody like family. I mean, to the extent that they can walk in the door and you can say, oh, hi Mary, good to see you again. Hi Frank, good to see you again. It's so much better than hi Mr. Smith or hi Mrs. Jones. I can just tell you that from personal experience. But the closer that you can make them, obviously the better referrals you're going to get. But the patients don't want to sue or cause other people that they like problems. They're willing to work things out. I used to have, I still do, a close friend who was the chairman of the board of Ritz-Carlton. And he told me something a long time ago that I thought was just fascinating, and I'll share with you, that he said that there were 4 things that kept his customers from complaining while they were at his hotels. 4 things, and they did many, many studies on this, and these 4 things were the only 4 things that really kept them from causing problems. Number 1 was when they drove on the property, they liked the looks of the property. Number 2 was who opened the door for them when they pulled up to the front desk, and were they nice to them. Number 3, was the person at the front desk nice to them? And number 4, did the people who took them up to their room with their luggage was nice to them? And Horst was telling me, and has told me many times, nothing else mattered, because if the customer was really happy with those 4 things, if their shower curtain was broken, or if there was a leak in the bathtub, they would call down and say, oh, I'm sorry to bother you, but would you fix the leak? And if they weren't happy, they would call and say, this place is a dump and we need to, and it's just the whole mentality from that. So learn from somebody who is a specialist in the hospitality industry, like my friend who ran the Ritz for years. He's the one who created the saying, ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen. That was their motto for the Ritz, which I think is still brilliant. So what I put together is a little thing here that's prime your practice for success. So provide patient-focused care, render responsive care, inform and educate patients effectively, monitor the physical environment, and enjoy adequate safeguards in your practice. I think if you do that in terms of a patient relationship, it will work out. So let's look at some of patients' examples of patient-focused care. As I said, calling people by their name. If they come in with their wife or their husband or their child, try to make them involved in somehow as part of the family and make them feel like they're part of the process. Have the staff walk somebody, and this seems obvious to me, but have them walk somebody to where they're going rather than say, go down to the second door on the right and turn in. You know, it's a simple matter, and it takes probably 15 seconds, but it just shows that you care about that person. And I've walked into the doctor's office and they say, second door down the right, turn in. That's very different than somebody saying, come on, let me show you where we're going. And it's a different type of approach and much, much better in my opinion. So to the extent that you can get the patient's feedback on things, I think that's always important. So occasionally do a little survey of them. Have a little survey filled out in the waiting room. What do you think of how our waiting room is? What do you think of how our magazines are? Are our staff treating you well? Are you satisfied with the doctor's services, et cetera, et cetera? To do that once or twice a year is no big deal, but then you understand how you're doing. And then if you need to do better, you do better. If you're doing great, hallelujah, it's all working. So responsive care is that, if the patient is concerned and they receive prompt attention, so you want to make sure that the patient gets prompt attention and they have access to all the services they need. And once again, I say here, treat them like the father, mother, brother, that kind of thing. To me, it's just, you may have already heard lots of this stuff, but as I said earlier, every one of these things came up in one case or another over my many years. I've tried, 200, 250 licensing cases before board, so many across the country. And these all come up. Once again, I would talk about the family. I already talked about most of that already, so we'll go on to the next one. There are things that you can do. Make sure you're talking to the people. Some doctors look people in the eye, others don't. I recommend looking people in the eye when you're talking to them, especially in a doctor's office. To the extent that you can give them some sort of call-in when they have a problem, that's good. I don't know how big your practice is, but I think to the extent that you can, it's a good idea. Keep everything up to date on their files. Waiting time. Waiting time is always an issue in a lot of practices. And to the extent that you can keep people from waiting too long, I think you're very wise to do that. I remember a story about a fancy lawyer in New York who went into a doctor's office and had to wait an hour and a half to see the doctor. And she charged some rate like $750 an hour. So next week she sent the doctor a bill for her time. And to the extent you can, try to keep them you want to make sure that they're not waiting too long. And as part of what I say at some point, I know what I say it right here, that try to give them brochures to read about the kind of things you're doing. Maybe even videos to watch while they're sitting in the waiting room. And so that all that kind of thing, they can learn more and grow more. And if you have magazines there, see if those are the kind of magazines they like, so that they're reading things that they want. And if they don't like Car and Driver, maybe they like, Vogue or something, I don't know. But so go and find out what they want. And once again, it's ways of keeping them happy, enjoying themselves, and as part of the patient experience that if they like you, they're not going to go after you. And that's the whole thing I'm talking about. Not talking about how to be a good dentist or a good carry-on professional. I'm talking about not to so that you can leave here. What I want you to leave here, like I've done for many doctors that I worked with, they can go on and practice the way they and their patients want them to practice. And nobody will bother them, and they can carry on their practice and take care of the patients and make a living while they're doing it. So the environment is an obvious one. You want to make sure the patients and the employees are safe in the environment, and you want to make sure that there are no issues. I was at a little talk yesterday where one of the speakers, this lady was saying, she walked into an office and there was a cord across the floor and it was arcing. Well, obviously you don't deal with that in an office. You don't put people in danger. Aside from whatever OSHA violation that would be, it's just not smart business. It's not smart being a professional. Once again, treat them like you would your mother, the mother standard. To the extent that you can, as I said earlier, to give them information to learn more about what they're doing, to learn more about what you do. I'll get into informed consents in a few minutes, which to me is one of the most important things. And I don't know how many of you use informed consents, but we're going to get there in a minute. But that's part of the whole process here. And this is, once again, patient information and education. I've already talked about that. So you want to keep your family coming back, right? You want them to come back next week, next month, next year, whatever it may be. Do everything you can to make them happy, make them comfortable, and then do good dental work. I mean, obviously that's the most important thing. But if you do good dental work and they don't understand what you're doing, or their wife doesn't understand, or their husband doesn't understand. I've seen complaints come from, I remember I had to deal with one matter, and it's just amazing. The patient was a cancer patient. The doctor was dealing with the cancer patient. The patient was supposed to die. The doctor kept the patient living 7 years after they were supposed to die, after they had already been told to die. The patient died. The wife filed a complaint with the medical board because she said the doctor didn't treat the patient right. But in all those 7 years, the doctor had never talked to the wife. And I think, in my opinion, it would have been so simple at some point to say, let's get your wife in here to talk about what we're doing. And so I had to go to a hearing and literally in front of a lot of people and say, he was very happy. She's not, but she didn't understand. He lived 7 years longer. But he won. We all went about our way, but once again, it was time, emotional energy, and some money that had to be spent just trying to deal with that. So some positive examples of, put the magazines in the area that are chosen based on their surveys. Physical spaces are designed to foster family involvement and make it comfortable for them. And regular staff training to really, really help them understand that this is part of how we carry on our practice in this office. And we believe in the mother standard of care, or whatever we call it at your place. So obviously, if things happen in every professional's office, because we're humans and the mistakes are made, and I recommend if you make a mistake, you fess up right away, you talk to the patient, and you try to resolve the issue in whatever way you can. When I was on the board of this hospital for many years, we made that policy change right in the very beginning, that if we made a mistake, we would get right to the patient, talk to them, or the patient's family, and deal with it. Now, luckily, we didn't make a lot, but we carried on that policy for all the years that I was there, and it worked beautifully, beautifully. No, not one malpractice suit brought against any of our doctors at the hospital for bad care. The one case we had was it was a slip and fall outside of the hospital in icy conditions, and that got resolved, but it wasn't anybody's real fault in that area. So informed consents are, as I said, it's very important, and we're going to get there. But once again, a happy patient is very necessary. You can read what I'm talking about there. It just helps everything. It just helps everything. But what if a patient has a complaint? So what do you do with it? You take it seriously, and you have a process in your office in place so that if a patient makes a complaint to one of the staff, there's a process in place that eventually comes up to the dentist so that the dentist will look at it and be part of that process. Don't ignore it. Don't ignore it. I mean, to me, it doesn't make any sense. Do you need to deal with it in the first 5 minutes? I mean, I write here, immediate attention. That doesn't mean the first 5 minutes. That means deal with it and talk to them and deal with it. And at some point, sit down and meet with the patient. See what's going on. And sometimes the patient won't meet with you because they're angry, but to the extent that they will meet with you, meet with them, see if you can work out what's the problem. What's the issue? Were they misguided on what they wanted? Did they have more pain than they thought they would have following a procedure? What happened? What's going on here? Or is it that they just had a bad day and they filed a complaint, or they made a complaint because they had a bad day? So solve the problem if you can. Solve it. As I said, if you want to, in certain situations, give a refund and move on. And if you give a refund, make sure that you get a release signed. Make sure you do. Don't do it without that. And I know people who do, and it doesn't make any sense to me. So let's talk about informed consents. Now, I don't know how many of you deal with informed consents. Can I just see a hand up? How many people have informed consents in their office? Okay, well, great. And so let's talk about that, because this is something I've been talking about for a long time, and I'm glad to see so many of you do. I recommend that you do a couple of things with informed consents. First of all, you have a general informed consent that tells people when they walk in the office that we're different here. We don't do things the same. And just so you know that we don't do things the same, and if you have any questions of us, we're happy to talk about it, and then they sign an informed consent saying that they don't do things the same. Then, if there's some specific procedures that are really different than what has happened traditionally, you have a different informed consent for that. I've been around this business for a long time, and I've not seen one patient yet, or reported one patient yet, who said, I'm going to refuse services because of informed consent. More likely than not, they don't read it, then they turn it down. But nobody does that. They come into you because they want some service that you have. Protect yourself. If you understand the basis of informed consents, they started in hospital settings because patients were potentially going to die for a procedure, the surgery they were about to undergo. And so they put together a document that said, I understand that I'm going to do a heart valve replacement, for example, and this may kill me. And I'm still going ahead, and I know I take the risk, and I'm going ahead, and et cetera, they sign it. So you want to make sure all of your informed consents, whatever they say, they at some point they have the word voluntary in there, that the patient says, I'm voluntarily doing this. I'm not being forced to do this. I can change my mind at any time, and that you put in the, I'll get back to here. Okay, here's what I'm talking about now. These are some of the basic elements that you want to make sure that you talk about what happens in the normal traditional practice, and then you say, we don't believe in that, and and that we believe that this procedure will benefit you enormously, and you know, you don't have to undergo this procedure. You can undergo whatever you want, but whatever you're doing it voluntarily, and you're doing it with your eyes wide open. And I can tell you that the number of times that this has not happened is legion, where people say, I have informed consents, and I say, let me see the patient file. Nothing in there. Nothing in there. And because somebody forgot to get it signed. Somebody forgot to file it correctly. Well, the sad fact of the matter is if it's not in the file, it didn't exist. So you want to make sure that that kind of stuff is done and done correctly in your office. And you want to make sure that you have the different aspects of the informed consent. Now, it's up to you to determine how many different informed consents you want. But I've seen doctors who have maybe 2 or 3 or 4 in their office for different specific procedures, whether they're doing IV chelation or IV vitamin C or hydrogen peroxide or whatever. So some have a different one for every procedure. But I do recommend you at least have a general and a specific for the procedure. And whether you write in on that procedure that what you're doing is fine with me. But make sure that you do that, and make sure you do it correctly and have it there. I will give you another example of a doctor who called me from Kansas a number of years ago, and he said, I've got a problem, Al. And I go, okay, what is it? He said, well, I heard about this Mexican drug, and I brought it into the country, and I gave it to a patient, and she died. And I go, oh, Lord. We're starting real bad right there. And I said, well, what was the basis of the drug? And he says, oh, a couple of people told me about it. I said, who were they? He says, I don't remember. I go, oh, we're really off to a good start here. I said, did you have an informed consent on this matter? And he said, yes, I did. And he says, oh, by the way, he said, Al, before I gave it to this patient, I gave it to my wife, and she's okay. I go, okay, well, but that's not exactly a ringing endorsement of some illegal medication into the country. I'm glad your wife's okay, though. But so, and then he said, I will go and find the informed consent and show it to you. He said, it's not in the file. And I go, he said, and I want to hire you. And I said, nope, there's nothing I can do for you. I don't want you to waste your money on me because you're going to lose your license. I mean, it's just that simple. Or maybe you can work out a deal, and if you're at a point of working out a deal and you want to call me and have me come in, but I'm not going to take your money and then start traveling to Kansas and do all that where I know that there's no chance. And so that's part of what I said earlier. Don't be the only one doing something. I mean, make sure that you're doing it in conjunction with other people. And make sure you have informed consents, and make sure the records are all straight. I just can't stress that enough. So one of the things I meant to talk about earlier, and I haven't, but I wanted to talk about it. I would say at least 60% of cases that I've been involved with involve some level of record-keeping problem. Okay, that shows up all the time in the record. Not all the time, but an awful lot of the time. So figure out a way to keep good records and keep good records, and make sure that you keep good records that show what you did. And I recommend even putting in records things like patient has never been happier. Patient has looked in the mirror and said, I can't believe how beautiful I look or how great I look. The problem is because the patients, when there's a problem later on, they say everything was terrible. But if you have some things in the patient records that say the patient was happy, they never felt better, blah, 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 blah. They came back for a 2-week visit and they were joyous. And, you know, all that kind of stuff is helpful to the lawyer who's going to have to defend you if you have a problem, because the patient said they were happy. So keep that kind of thing in mind. So let's talk about what do you do when if you can't get away from anything but some dental board coming and talking to you. The patient somehow reports you or a competitor reports you. The important thing is don't take it lightly. I mean, that's the most important thing. I've seen people say, well, this is ridiculous. I didn't do anything wrong. Nothing is ridiculous because it has to go, you want to make sure it goes away. So take it seriously. If an investigator shows up at your door from the dental board or any governmental agency, don't talk to them. You don't have any requirement to talk to them. I can tell you that. You have a requirement to talk to them eventually, but not on the spot, okay? And I recommend strongly you not talk to them. You tell them as nicely as you can that my lawyer has instructed me to call my lawyer, and my lawyer will call you and we'll schedule a meeting a week from now or 2 weeks from now, and I'll be happy to talk to you about this whole thing at that point. And then you call your lawyer, and then you ask them to leave. And some investigators think they're police and they don't want to leave, but unless they have a search warrant, which is a criminal action, which you have to let them search, they don't have a right to demand you to talk on the spot. They don't have a right to demand dental records on the spot. I want dental records. Here's a subpoena. Thank you. I will take it, show it to my lawyer, and we'll move on. No problem at all. I'm fully cooperating with you. I'm not going to cause you any trouble, but I'm not going to give you things right at the moment. That just won't happen. So, and if you get a phone call, the same thing. I mean, sometimes I see people who think they're pure of heart. I see people that, that they think they're smarter than the investigator, and quite frankly, they are. But the investigator's dangerous. So you don't talk to them. It would be like an IRS person calling you on the phone. And I think all of us would be sensible enough that we don't talk to the IRS on the phone. We go and talk to our accountant or whoever we talk to about how to deal with those kind of things. So you just don't talk to them. And you tell them, I'm going to fully cooperate. I'll work with you. Not today. Not today. That's my standing lawyer instructions. And it's the same thing that your staff should know. If the staff gets a phone call and somebody requests records, I've seen staff copy the records and send it to them and then tell the dentist or the doctor the next day, oh, I sent the investigator records yesterday. They didn't understand. They didn't have a policy in place at the office to make sure that we don't do anything like that. And so that's simple office policies and procedures. So I mean, it's important to see a lawyer at that point. Sometimes there are different states that sometimes send out different types of notices. One sends out a notice of an informal hearing. Some may send out an offer of settlement. Any of that kind of stuff is just a document saying, please. There's no requirement for anybody to look at that and sign that. You go and talk to some lawyer, and I really recommend it be some lawyer who knows what they're talking about, not just your local real estate lawyer. I remember an old case of mine years ago in Florida on the other coast. This doctor who was very, very, very different doctor and doing all sorts of wild things. He called, an investigator called him, and he called his real estate lawyer, literally his real estate lawyer, and said, can you handle this? And the guy said, sure. And the doctor lost his license. He hired me on an appeal, and we almost won, but we didn't win the appeal. But it was somebody who didn't know anything about what they were doing. It would be like you're having a tax problem and you're going to an MD, say, can you solve my tax problem? They don't know how to do that. So please don't do that. Don't do that. So there are people who believe that if government comes after you, you should attack government back. And I know one lawyer who's a friend of mine who believes in that very much. And And I don't mind if people want to do that, but I can tell you it's very expensive, and I'm not sure that it's for everybody. I don't think that attacking with court filings and everything because there's an investigation going on is warranted until you know that you're really up against the wall. And if you are, sometimes it's necessary to go after them. And I have, on that one case that I talked about with in Florida, the dentist, the dental board, we petitioned the governor to have the whole dental board removed and appoint a new dental board for our hearing. And the governor, to his credit, did that. We had enough evidence to say this board is totally biased. We want a different dental board, and we want one doctor on the board who does advertising. And the governor, to his credit, did it. We had a full hearing, fair hearing. We won, and we moved on. So you can do things, but you have to know what you're doing. And at the very beginning, you ought to know what the risk and reward are. If it's a very, very minor little thing, and you can avoid a discipline by paying a little fine and maybe having an administrative warning letter in the background, and that resolves an issue, that might make sense, okay? That might make sense to some people. I don't recommend anybody on a minor thing accept any sort of penalty that affects their license, because then if there's another problem comes up, you're a repeat offender. And being a repeat offender is not good in the dental or the medical or the licensing world, because the prosecutors look at you differently. Oh my gosh, this person did something wrong before and they're doing it again. Oh, we got to get this person. So let's just talk about some of the do's and don'ts. If the board comes to, don't ignore them. Don't ignore how medicine or dentistry is changing. Don't think, as I said, you're pure of heart. Don't think you're smarter than them. And don't wait to protect yourself. Don't wait until the last 2 days before you have an answer due on 30 days, and you wait till the 28th and start looking for somebody to help you. That's real dangerous, because all of a sudden you may blow the deadline and you've been defaulted. And you don't want to do that in anywhere. The do's, as I said earlier, keep good records. I can't tell you enough. Good records will solve so many problems, especially when you do them the way I was talking about, that the patient is happy, the patient looks good, et cetera, et cetera. Go to meetings like this, because I think it's so important that if you have a problem, you can say, listen, I was here, I learned, I got continuing education credits, and I'm not doing things my own way. Obviously, keep your informed consents in the file, make sure they're there, make sure they're kept and they're accurate, and I'll talk about informed consent for a bit more. That if you're seeing a patient over a period of, let's say, 10 or 15 years, I would recommend you have more than one informed consent in the file. I mean, I think that every year or two, people should re-up an informed consent to make sure that they still understand what's going on, they still know what's happening, and somebody can't say, well, she understood then, but she didn't understand now. So to keep them up to date. Whether you do them every year or 2 years, I don't care. I would recommend no more than 2 years to renew if you have an ongoing relationship with a patient. And try to stay familiar with the laws and rules to the extent that you go to meetings like this and get a feel for what your friends are doing. And part of a meeting like this, I always thought one of the great benefits was talking in the hall and talking in little groups and meeting people and sharing ideas, and you get as much out of that as you do out of the lectures often. And I think that's a wonderful way to move forward. And obviously, if you get contacted, make sure you talk to a lawyer, and make sure it's somebody who knows what they're doing. So once again, know the rules of the state, ensure that all forms and informed consent are complete, stay active in your community. I think that the more you were active, just being whether it's going to the Rotary Club or the Lions or whatever it may be, you're out there, obviously it's good for business, but it's also good to be known, and to be known as the good person. You can't avoid the attorney, and once again, if you have a problem, you know you need to talk to a lawyer. And this is my final words of advice, that if you see legal advice for 5 cents, understand it's probably worth 5 cents, and it's probably good one is probably worth a lot more than that. So thank you. Thank you.